Okay, let's start. So my name is Ronald Daam. I will be moderating this session. So we had some good sessions already this morning. People found their way up here to the boardroom floor. So we're happy to see that. And if you like this stream, just stay here. There are more exciting presentations later on. But you have the stage now, Janine. You will update us on how the measures of ESG impact on credit ratings, issuer profiles, and label bonds. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. So thank you very much, everybody, for being here, and thank you for giving Fitch Ratings the opportunity to present to you. My name is Janine Dow. I've been at Fitch Ratings for many, many years, primarily on the analytical side, but for the past 3 years in Sustainable Fitch. Sustainable Fitch is a brand. It will eventually become a subsidiary, but it is a brand which encompasses all our ESG products and solutions. Now, I'm in a very unenviable position here because I'm directly following my colleague from Moody's. So quickly, while she was speaking, and subsequent to that, I was flipping through my presentation to see how I might be able to change it a little bit to make sure that for those of you who were in the previous session, you're not having a repeat from a different angle. So I'll try to improvise a little bit and see if that works. But today, I'm really going to focus on 3 topics, and 2 of them are much more dominant. So I'm going to talk about how Fitch Ratings looks at the impact of ESG on its credit ratings. And we have 2 products there that we consider. And then I'm going to look at a new product, which are our ESG ratings, which have absolutely nothing to do with credit ratings. And this is a tool to measure the pure ESG impact of an entity, its bonds, and a combination of the 2. So those are our ESG ratings, and I'm going to spend some time on those main areas. So not surprising, really, given that Fitch Ratings is essentially our core business is credit ratings. It's not very surprising that in 2019, when we started looking into ESG, our first product was directly related to our credit ratings. And what we did there is that we rolled out something called Esg Relevance Scores, which are an integral part of the credit rating. The next slide looks at them in more detail, but they're really telling the user of our credit ratings, do any of these specific predetermined E, S, and G factors have an impact on that credit rating, either negatively or positively, and if so, how much and why and where? So that's what we do. Those are our ESG relevance scores. Combined with credit ratings as well, we have a product which we call our climate vulnerability scores. And these are scores which look out over a much longer time frame. They're looking exclusively at climate. So if we think of a credit rating, I know we've got 20 and 30-year bonds in the market, but most credit ratings, the sort of horizon we're looking at is something between 3 and 5 years. So a relatively short period of time. Our climate vulnerability scores are trying to look out over a 30-year horizon, sector by sector, economic sector by sector, and we call them issuers, company by company, to see how the climate, how vulnerable their business models might become under a certain climate scenario, and we use the IPCC. So those are our vulnerability scores. Then we always say that our ESG research department is a product. I mean, I think it's not really data-driven. That is to do with thematic research, talking about relevant topics, etc. So we have a dedicated team of research analysts who put out information all the time. And then lastly, we have our ESG ratings. And these ESG ratings, which will be launched in the 3rd quarter of this year, it's a very ambitious product and project, because what we hope to achieve at the time of launch is full coverage. We were talking with Julia about the importance of coverage. So full coverage of every single labeled bond in the market at that time, and the issuers that go behind it. Now, I think there's a cutoff. Obviously, we're not looking at sort of $20 million type issuance. So I think that the cutoff is probably around $200 million, but very ambitious. So we're looking to have an enormous amount of information on labeled bonds and on the issuers. Nothing to do with credit, just saying exactly the questions that the ESG relevance scores don't answer. How green is this company? How socially just is this company? What sort of governance practices does it have? And that will be coming in September. So those are our products. I forgot to say, if anybody wants to interrupt, please do, because I'm not here to talk by myself, and I could, probably talk forever on something like this, which is what I love. So if we look at the ESG relevance scores, remember those are the integral part of the credit ratings. The analysts assign the credit ratings, and then they say, on these credit ratings, was there anything in E, S, or G that had an impact on that credit rating? And if so, how material was it on a score of 1 to 5, with 5 being a key rating driver, so it actually impacted and influenced that rating, and 1 being totally irrelevant? They make no moral judgment, so we don't really mind. I was going to say we don't care. Of course we care, but we don't really mind if that company is operating in coal or in renewable energy. All we're looking at is the impact on the credit rating. So is the probability of default on this instrument, on this issuer, is it likely to be higher or lower given these considerations that we look at, which are predetermined 14 or 15 E, S, and G factors that we look at. And so they're observations on the credit on the rating decision. They're an integral part, and every single credit rating, public credit rating that we have, has the ESG relevance scores embedded into them. So we have over 10,500 issuers and transactions which have been scored along this way. And if we think about it, since I know this whole conference is about data, this is a very confusing slide, so forget it. But what I'm trying to show here is these are the environmental factors we look at. These are social, these are governance. Now, not every company is the same. The sort of environmental impact which might be relevant for a mining company is not necessarily going to be relevant for a sovereign. And so we do have special templates, and the analysts have thought a lot about these things, so it's not one size fits all. What is important and how do we look at it? So if we look at something like this peach colored here, which says applies to sovereign, we've obviously got political stability and rights which come under governance. That's exclusively to sovereigns. And if we look at something like here, this light orange color, which is applying to supranational institutions, we can see that that is mandate effectiveness. Obviously, the supranationals have to comply with their mandates. So they are different. There's a bit of a mix and match, and I think that's quite helpful. We have 56 templates, as we call them, looking at the different ESG relevance scores. But those are the sort of things, and each of these are scored. So if we've got 14 or 15, by 10,500 issuers and transactions, that is a huge amount of data. And each of those are positive or negative. So here is just a very short description of what we look at. As I say, the 1 and 2 are different degrees of immateriality, so they're really not impacting at all. And 5 is the credit rating driver. So if we look at something like, if I think of an example, if we had last year when Credit Suisse faced some problems in terms of internal controls, in terms of breaches, we identified that as a governance breach. There was an impact on the rating in terms of the outlook for that credit rating was changed to negative. So that for us is a rating action. And then one of the governance scores for that company was changed from 3 to 4. So it's showing that there is an impact on the credit rating, moderate, not a driver, not a 5, and it was negative. In terms of positives, we're also seeing a lot more positives, and funnily enough, a lot coming through on the social front. We've already heard from Moody's that the social sort of agenda is creeping up the ladder, and we find that as well. So what we're finding is a number of credit ratings positively impacted by social considerations. So that is our scale. I will speed up a little bit. This sort of shows you the same thing again. You've got the, the low influence over there, the 1 and 2, and the 5 coming through very, very high. But when we talk about the transmission, we're really looking at these issues, as we call them, ESG issues, and how are they impacting. And we try and show them on this thing, which we call a navigator. It doesn't look very clear here. But here would be my 5 environmental factors, 5 social, and 4 governance. How they're scored, these are all negative, but they could have been positive. What they mean and where they impact. So is it balance sheet, is it P&L, is it business model, is it strategy, is it reputation, etc., etc. And we think this is quite a transparent way of identifying where things are coming through. And so these scores were rolled out in February 2019, so we've also got the track record now for just over 3 years. And then still on these scores, we do a lot of products, a lot of images that our clients can buy. So we do heat maps, identifying which sort of sectors you might expect to find greater impact in one of the areas. I mean, a manufacturer of vehicles is going to be much more exposed, let's say, potentially to GHG emissions than a financial institution. So you can clearly see the outliers and maybe look into that and find that information. And we also produce these dashboards per sector, per industry. So you could look up German automotive industry and find how many elevated, as we call them, 4 and 5 scores are impacting that industry and across which companies. This example for Volkswagen, we always use it, but it, of course, is clearly out of date. So those are the relevance scores. And the next one are these climate vulnerability scores. These ones look over the 30-year. And what we're trying to assess here is the vulnerability of a company or a sector's business model under a static climate scenario over 30 years. And we have the sector studies covering about 16 industrial sectors, which just show you what the trajectory is, assuming the climate does what it's expected to do according to that scenario, and showing the vulnerability. So we would have on the high level of the scale, from 90 to 100, we're really saying that sector or that business, that issuer, is under an existential threat to its business model, assuming that climate does what it does. And on the other hand, at 0, basically that company can continue doing whatever it's doing forever, and we don't see any threat to its operations coming from climate. So now we come on to how am I doing? Let me have a look.
You have another 15 minutes.
Yeah, okay. Things are good. So ESG ratings, and this, as I say, is coming in the 3rd quarter. So the ESG ratings do exactly the opposite to the relevant scores. They exactly answer those questions. Is this company's business activities, are they sustainable? What impact do they have on the environment? What impact do they have on society? And how good is its governance? That's for the entity rating. We have something that we've called a framework rating. This is very much dedicated to the labeled bonds. So most of the labeled bonds are issued alongside or within the constraints, I guess, of a framework which is determined by the companies. And what the analysts are looking at here is instrument by instrument, how does that align to that framework, and how does that issuer's framework align with best practices? And we normally look at the ICMA guidelines for this. And then we have the instrument rating, which is looking at the individual bond, but also on the overlay of the business activities. So to the extent that a coal mining company is issuing a green bond, we combine the two to say, well, what does that really mean, given that the business of that company is actually quite, highly negative to the environment. But that instrument, we understand, the use of proceeds of that particular instrument are financing something that's green. And each of these ratings are accompanied by a report, by a rating, which goes surprisingly from 1 to 5, with 5. Well, the next one shows the scale, and also shows a score which goes from 0 to 100. So we believe this is highly granular, and we understand that the market, our market is really investors. We understand that investors want comparable, transparent, trustworthy, and useful information. And we hope that the sort of data that we're going to provide for each of these ESG ratings is going to do just that. So looking at the industry, 1 to 5, 0 to 100, and then the framework and the instrument as well. And our model, this is model-driven, the ESG ratings are model-driven. We have over 1,500 inputs of data into our model to produce each of these ratings, and that information will also be relevant. And then we can talk about the sort of things we look at if you're interested later on. Of course.
On the form feature, you were talking about using the allocation of proceeds and so on. And the allocation is obviously very interesting, so you know that the money has to be spent for what they said that they would do. But what is even more important from a greenwashing perspective is also the impact. So do you also account for the impact reports that, so you know what impact the allocation has had?
Yeah, we do, and we score all of that. And I say, I mean, I'm sounding flippant because this, I say it's model-based, but we do have, by the end of July, we will have a team of 80 dedicated ESG analysts working around the globe. So although it's model-driven, there is a human, hopefully, touch to this as well. And we're looking exactly at that. And one of the lines, I mean, I know because I do these things, so, we do have like, what are the impacts? How measurable are they? How do they compare year on year? Is there even that information year on year? And then take that back to things like taxonomy, or in the case of the social impacts, take that back to what we've designed, either the SDGs, the social ones, or the sort of inspiration behind the EU's social taxonomy, and say, well, what is that actually doing? How does it measure up? And is it achieving what they say they're going to do? So we try to, of course it's an opinion at the end, 1 to 5, but we are very much trying to do that on the impact as well as the use of proceeds. And even the use of proceeds, I mean, I think the analysts are putting information and opinions into the use of proceeds because a lot of it is quite questionable, isn't it? We see a lot of bonds where the use of proceeds go into just general working capital. And that working capital could be used for almost anything across all business lines. So we first of all look at the business activities and say, well, how much? To the extent that we have that information, how much is the divisional contribution to business activities from that company, and how much can we assume, if everything goes into a working capital pot, how much can we really assume goes where? So it is quite moral, it is quite moralistic, this, I think, and let's see what the market thinks, but we have to have an opinion. Sorry.
How much does this ESG rating cross over to your credit ratings?
Not at all. Yeah, we have exchange. I mean, we are, given that we're hoping for full coverage in September, we're not sort of sitting here with nothing. So we've done an awful lot of this already, and everything that has already been rated, every instrument, and we have had engagement with issuers. So different levels of engagement, some full engagement and, committing to contracts, some none at all. And that's just life, isn't it? But we have been trying to have contact with all the issuers, and generally it's been quite favourable. I mean, from the minute someone says that Fitch Ratings is going to assign an ESG rating to your instrument, I think most issuers pretty much want to get engaged, don't they? Because otherwise you could end up with a bad rating. So it tends to be different groups of people on the credit side. We, generally sort of having conversations with CFOs and investor relations, and this, I mean, most of the companies that we're looking at, they have some sort of a sustainability team in place, so we can generally talk to that kind of people. Yeah? So this slide, I bet you can't read at all, and neither can I. But this was showing you what sort of things we are looking at when we look at our data points. So, not surprisingly, when we're looking at the entity ESG rating, we focus very much on the business activities and split them up and then align them with taxonomies and try to develop some kind of scientific knowledge. Our analysts are also split by industry specialization, so quite quickly you can become a mini specialist. On the framework, I think it's very much a sort of checkbox to see what is there and what's not. I mean, and obviously how committed and how compliant companies are with sticking to what they say they're going to do. And in fact, how good are their reports and what's the content? And then the instrument is the combination of the two. But there's an awful lot of, just 1,500 lines of Excel. Well, it used to be Excel, now it's something better, but it is quite a lot of questions to look at. And so what are the definitions? From the one here, we are having an excellent ESG profile. And what do we mean by excellent profile? We really mean the impact of that company or that instrument on the environment and on society, and how aligned is that business activity or that instrument with, we take the EU taxonomy, but we consider all taxonomies. And then, as I said, for the social considerations, it's things like SDGs. For governance, we look at the company as a whole. I think the market and analysts are quite familiar with looking at governance. We've been doing that for many years. Of course, because these are ESG ratings, we have a lot more drill down into things like composition of the board in terms of diversity, remuneration linked to environmental and social targets, measurability of such targets, etc. But a lot of the things to do with governance are the typical things in terms of independence, etc. So that is the scoring. And then the reports. The reports look quite different to Fitch Ratings' normal reports, which are in that sort of standard credit rating report. So these are reports which are showing the alignment. Would be, I think, alignment to ICMA. And then we would have what the company says and Fitch's opinion all the time. So what the company says and Fitch's opinion, and then the scoring. So from 1 to 5 for everything, giving you that very granular level of information. So we are quite excited about this, and we will hope that it's going to be impactful and achieve that coverage and that comparability, which is something that we're all keen to have. And so just, very, very right at the end, just to compare the two, I mean, I'm sure you've probably all completely got it, but the ESG ratings have nothing to do with credit, whereas our relevance scores are 100% credit related. Can they drive credit ratings? An ESG rating, definitely not. But the relevance score is yes, it's integrated, and so on. Both of us have different analysts. Both of us will be looking at monitoring and updating these at least once a year. The credit ratings are obviously regulated, and we have to do that anyway, but the ESG ratings as well. And again, confusingly, scores of 1 to 5, but meaning completely different things. So that was all I had prepared, and I would like to very much thank you for being here, and hopefully either questions and answers.
So Janine, thanks a lot for this great presentation.
Thank you.
So indeed, you already mentioned Q&A. Are there some more questions from the audience that you want to ask to Janine? Okay, so maybe I have prepared some. Oh, you have a question? Sorry. Go ahead.
Do you feel that you're a bit late with the ESG game, considering? Sorry. Do you feel you're a bit late to the ESG game, given that there's regulations already come in, and then there's obviously a lot of developments in the markets, and there are many suppliers out there already?
I mean, I suppose if we look at our core business credit ratings, no. Because I think our relevance scores actually answer that. I have to caveat this because I am on the analytical side and not on the sales side, so you're probably going to get a much more honest answer from me than you might from a sales point of view. I think there are so many solutions. I was looking at something that the Basel Committee put out recently, where there were over 700 providers of ESG scores and ratings globally. So what I do think is that late or not late, we probably put everything in the sieve and things will filter out over time. And let's see what stays and what goes. I have a lot of respect for a lot of products, and I wish we'd invented them. But I think similarly, there's an awful lot of products that seem to convey very little opinion. And Fitch always has said that what we are is transparent, integral, and full of opinion. So let's just hope we do that as well.
More questions from the audience? So Janine, I also have a question for you.
Ooh.
How dynamic do you expect that the ESG ratings will be compared to the credit ratings?
Oh, I think very. I think the credit ratings, all our credit analysts, they really strive for stability, don't we? Because the last thing you want in a portfolio construction is to have a credit rating that goes up and down every 6 months, and then you're stuck with this bond, and what do you do with it? So I think sometimes for an issuer, having a credit rating is quite disappointing, because you look year after year after year, and it remains on stable outlook, and nothing really is changing. So that's good for the market, and that's what the credit ratings are supposed to do in a sort of through the cycle. But for an issuer, it must be a bit frustrating, because you would want to see some improvement. But I think the ESG ratings are likely to be super dynamic. First of all, because the granularity of 0 to 100, so every point counts, and that already is a change. And then I think the whole ESG environment is so dynamic. We're getting new regulations all the time, new companies striving to be more transparent. So I would expect that we could see big shifts in the ESG ratings from one year to another. That doesn't mean to say they're all going to be up, improving, but I would imagine that we're going to see quite a lot of dynamic, and hopefully that's got a value. Yeah.
So maybe a last question then, before we end. So you already elaborated a lot on the model, but is there more to add on the model that you have in place for the ESG ratings? And do you have maybe an example that is presenting how the model works?
Well, I guess within all these lines, obviously models have to go yes, no, isn't it? Or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They can't be you can't comment on a line. You can comment in sort of qualitative stuff, but the whole point of the model is to be quantitative. So what sort of information do we look at? If we took something like the environment, we'd probably be looking very much at the trajectory. So not only the business activities, but we would look at everything from what sort of commitments has the company made, what are the metrics, how are they measured, where are they disclosed, do they really do that, what is this company a signatory to, and what does that mean, is that a good thing or not? So we try to really be quite complete. On the governance front, I think it's an awful lot about things like percentage of independent board members, percentage of diversity of the board. But again, why we're not looking just at gender or age, we're really looking at experience, because what we've seen is that there are quite a lot of checklists of board composition, which is just having a token group of minorities. And then when you actually look at the CVs, you might realize that those people are unlikely to really contribute to that industry, because you find that they have absolutely very little relevance. So we're trying to do a bit of a deeper dive in that kind of thing. And then, of course, the controversies. We do a lot of scraping of independent information for the controversies to see if the company's public statements actually match up with actions in terms of things like fines and penalties. So it's quite a lot of work.
So Janine, thanks again.
You.
So if you have more questions, you can visit the Fitch stand below.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for the presentation. We have a small present
for you,
so I would like to hand that over to you.
I hope it's $1 million.
I hope as well. I hope for you as well. So we have a next session in 7 minutes or 6 minutes. So if you'd like to have a coffee or a small bite, you can take it outside.